Hello, this is Matt from Matt Heaney Apps, and welcome to part 2 in our series covering all of the basics of Swift 3. In this video, we will take a look at if statements. We will also take a look at else, else if, and switch statements. So let's jump into Xcode. Okay, so into Xcode, and we want to get started with a playground, and we will call this playground if statements. And we will get rid of this string to start with a nice blank playground. Okay, so what is an if statement and why would we use an if statement? Well, with an if statement, we can take a block of code and say only run this block of code if a certain condition or a certain rule is true. And if that condition or that rule is not true, do not run that block of code. And almost pretend that block of code isn't even there. So let's take a look at an example. Let's pretend we're making the game. And in this game, the player starts with 3 lives. And let's pretend the gamer has just been hit by a bullet and they have lost a life. So we'll take 1 off of lives. So what we now have to do is check for game over. And basically what we want to do is only run the code for game over if the gamer has run out of lives. Because if we just had the code for game over, which in this case will just be printing the words game over here on the right, you can see we still have 2 lives left. So we don't want to be printing game over. So we will do this in an if statement. So we will say if, our keyword, and then we will take our condition. So if lives is set to 0. And in an if statement, if we say if something is set to something, we do 2 equals. So we will say if lives is set to 0, and then an open curly bracket, drop a line, and it should put in a closing curly bracket for you for a block of code. So what are we doing here? We're saying if this is the case, then do any code between these brackets. So if lives is set to 0, do anything we have here. Now in our case, we will just simply print game over. Obviously in a real game, you'd have a lot more for game over, but for now we will simply print game over. And as you can see, it's not doing it. But why is it not doing it? Because lives is set to 2. So this is not the case, and lives is not set to 0, so it will not run this code. If, however, before this, we lost 3 lives in one go, and lives is now set to 0, this is true, so this is now going to run. So basically, we're saying only run this code if this here is true, which now it is. So in an if statement, if we want to say if something is set to something, we will use 2 equals. But we can do a lot more than just saying if something is set to something. So in this game, the gamer also has a score. And they scored, say, 5 points. Now in this game, the maximum score you can get is 10. And if you get 10 points, you would have won. So not only can we say if score is set to 10, then they would have won. So only run this if their score was 10. So as it's 5, this is not going to run. We can also do things like if score is not equal to something. So if score is not equal to 10, then they have not got 10, then we're going to print loser because they haven't won. Okay, so if score is set to 10, or if score isn't set to 10, which as it is not 10, this is true, so this is going to run. We can also say if score is less than a certain number, so if it's less than 5, they didn't do a very good job. So we will say to them something like, ouch, that's a low score, because they got less than 5. So this is only going to run if the score is less than 5. As it's 5, it is not less than 5, so this will not run. If it was 4, however, 4 is obviously less than 5, so this is true, so it's going to run this. Just like less than, we can do greater than. So if score is greater than, say, 7, they did a pretty good job. So we will say nice try. Again, this is not going to run because score is not greater than 7 because score is set to 4. If our score was 8, then our score would be greater than 7, so this is going to run. We can also do if score is greater than or equal to a certain number. So if score is greater than 9 or equal to 9, and we can do the same thing with less than or equal. Okay, so now this one is only going to run if score is less than 5 or equal to 5. So less than or equal to 5. Now sometimes for our if statements, we want to have more than one condition that has to be true. So what we want to do is say if score is greater than 4 and less than 7, which is kind of middle ground. So if score is greater than 4, and for another rule, we can say and, so two and signs. So score is greater than 4, but score is less than 7. So now both of these have to be true for this to run. So if, just before this, score was set to 9, score is greater than 4, but it's not also less than 7. So if it was 6, both of these would be true. So now this is going to run. So with and, both conditions have to be true. And if you want, you can just keep adding conditions. On the other hand, sometimes we want if this rule is true or if this rule is true. So we could say if score equals 10 or, so two pipe signs, score equals 0. So either they won or they got no points at all. Then we're going to print something like wow. Either a genuine wow because they won or a bit of a sarcastic wow because they got nothing. So now if score was 10 or 0, this is going to run. If we update our value of score here to 10, this one is true, so it's going to work. Or if we change score to 0, now this one is true. And again, it's going to work. So with or, we can say if either of these conditions are true, then run the code. And again, we can just keep adding conditions if you want. Now sometimes a simple if statement isn't quite enough. So sometimes we want to say if a condition is true, do something, but if it's not, do something else. So we can say if score is greater than 7, and if that is the case, we will say great score. But if score isn't greater than 7, we want to do something else. So we can simply, following this if statement, say else, open curly drop a line. So what this is doing here is saying if this here is correct, do this. If it's not, do whatever is in the else. So we will say unlucky, try again. Now one of these two is always going to run. Either the score will be greater than 7 and this is going to run, or it will not be greater than 7 and this is going to run. So as you may remember, our score is currently set back to 0, so it is not greater than 7. But if we update the value of score down here to 8, as you can see, this is now true. So this block of code here runs and the else does not run. But if our score was under 7, this is not true. So this will not run and this block instead is going to run. So with an if and an else, we're saying if this is true, do the first block. If it's not, do whatever code we have in the else. So that is if with an else. Now sometimes we want to take this just a little bit further and we can use else if. So what is else if and why would we use it? Well, to see what it is and to fully understand it, we'll jump straight into an example. So in our game, we are now in the bonus round. And in the bonus round, if you score 4, your score will be doubled. If you score 8, you will lose 2 points. Okay, so slightly different rules in the bonus round. And our gamer scored 4. So we will use if statements to set this up. If bonus round score equals 4, then we will double bonus round score with times equals 2. And then following this if statement, we will do our other one. So bonus round score equals 8. We will take bonus round score and we will take away 2. So 2 nice easy if statements. If bonus round score is 4, times it by 2 to double it. And if they got 8, then take 2 away. Okay, so we know the bonus round score was 4. So looking at this logic, at the end of this, bonus round score should now be 8. Because we got 4, so we had to double it. But bonus round score is 6. And why is it 6? We're reading down like a book. And what we're saying here is, if bonus round score is 4, times it by 2, that's working fine. Bonus round score does go to 8. But we're then saying, if bonus round score is set to 8, take away 2. And by this stage, the score is 8. Because after we doubled up for the bonus, the score was 8, so we took 2 away. But we only want this to happen if their final bonus score was 8. Otherwise, you would never ever double up your score because as soon as you do, you're losing 2 points. This is where else if comes into play. So this second if statement will now become an else if. And what this is saying is only check this rule if this above if statement rule is not correct. So it's a bit like a normal else, where we're saying only do this if the above condition is not correct. So now what happened with an else if is that we look down these if statements like a list. We'll look at the first if statement, and if it's true, we will do the code in that block, and we'll stop there. Don't do the else if statement. However, if that first if statement rule is not true, we will continue to the second condition, and we will only check this second condition if this first one is not true. So if bonus round score is not 4, then we'll look at this. And if it's 8, we will do this. But it's only checking if it's 8, if this first one isn't true. We could keep doing more else ifs, and it would keep working its way down until it found one that was right, and then it would stop looking down the list at the other else ifs. Okay, so now, if we looked at bonus round score, it's 8, just like it should be, because we're running our code to double the score, and because this was true, this is not even being looked at. If our score, however, was 8, so change this here, as this first if statement is now false, we will look down at the else if. And as this one is now true, this is going to run. If we did have more else ifs, if this was true, it would not look at the other else ifs associated with this little collection. But if this was not true, it would keep looking. After all of your else ifs, we could have an else, which in this case would say no bonus, where we're saying if this one isn't true and this one isn't true, and if all else ifs in this group were not true, then do this. Okay, if they got, say, 7, this is not true, so we'll look at this one. This is also not true, and as it can't find one that's right, we will simply show no bonus and their score stays at 7. So that is what an else if can do. Now, there is just one more thing that I want to show you, and that is a switch statement, which is a bit like a big if statement. So for this, we will look at the gamer's high score. So let's just say they set a brand new high score, which was, say, 8. And what we want to do, we want to give them a different message, depending on what their high score is, rating their high score. So if their new high score is 0, we want to give them a certain message. If it's 1, we want to give them a different certain message. If it's 2, another different certain message, all the way up to 10. Now we could do that with a whole load of if statements, but that could get pretty messy. So we can use a switch statement, and we will switch on high score. So we will say switch, and we can hit enter to use the template. And it's going to ask us for a value to switch on. So we want to switch on high score. Don't worry about the errors because we just haven't finished filling this out yet. What we want to do is say if high score is 0, do something. So case 0 colon. So what do we want to do if high score is 0? We will say a message that will say really 0. Okay, so if high score is 0, do this. And we can simply add some more cases. So if they got 1, we will say ouch. If they got 2, we will say that's awful. If they got 3, that's bad. 4, a very disapproving If it's 5, we'll say average. 6, we will say getting there. 7, we will say yeah. 8, we will say woo. 9, we'll say nailed it. And 10, we'll say champion. So now if high score is 0, we do this. If it's 1, we do this. 2, this. 3, this, and so on. So as high score is 8, we're saying woo. Now a switch statement needs a default. So something to run if none of these are true. If our score isn't 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10, something's gone wrong, or they cheated. So we will say, did you cheat? So the default is a bit like an else statement. We're going to say if none of these are true, do this. So now whatever number high score is, the correct message will print. So as high score is 8, it will look down, it will see 8. This is going to run. If high score was 0, high score will be 0. So really 0 is going to run. If it's 9, it will look through, it will find 9 and it will tell us nailed it. And if none of these cases are correct, so if somehow they scored 11, it will do the default and it will say, did you cheat? Because they somehow got above 10, and as this pretend game only goes up to 10, they must have cheated. Okay, so that is what the default is. If none of these are true, do this. Okay, so that is an if statement, if with an else, else if, and switch statement. So that rounds up our look at if statements. If you have any questions, post them down in the comments. And as always, thank you very much for watching. If you liked watching this video, which I really hope you did, hit that like button, hit subscribe, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.